of Surah Al-Baqarah. So we're just going to look over the basics, the foundations of this surah, the reasons for its revelation, some ahadith related to it, as well as a synopsis of this surah. Given that it's 286 verses, that it's the longest surah in the Quran, it would be an impossible task to do the entire tafsir right now. Even if you do it in the entire month of Ramadan, it would still be very difficult. So we're just going to do an overview of the surah so we have an idea of what to expect when we read it, be it in Ramadan or outside of the month of Ramadan. So we have, some kind of idea about the reasons for why certain verses were revealed, the context behind some events that occurred throughout this surah and throughout the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, as I mentioned, it's 286 verses, so it's a lot of ayahs. And you might know that there are certain verses, certain surahs that were just revealed for one reason. For example, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. That is a very short surah. The entire surah was revealed for one reason. Okay, it's just one thing, one event happened, the whole surah was revealed. However, 286 verses are not just going to come down for just a single reason. Okay, there's a large number of reasons why certain chunks of ayahs and verses were revealed upon the Prophet ﷺ. So we'll go over some of those reasons. We won't go over all of them because there's so many significant events. This surah was revealed in Medina. Okay, Surah Al-Baqarah is a Madani surah. It was revealed when the Prophet ﷺ, after he had emigrated from Mecca to Medina, and it was revealed over an extensive period of time. And one of the interesting things we'll talk about is the final verse. The final verse that was ever revealed upon the Prophet ﷺ was actually revealed in Surah Al-Baqarah. Okay, so it's actually a part of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is essentially the first surah that we are reading in the Quran after Surah Al-Fatiha, and yet the very final verse is in this surah as well. So what are some of the reasons for its revelation? Now we'll notice that the reasons for its revelation are directed towards different groups of people. It addresses specifically the disbelievers who are living in Medina at the time. This includes the Jewish tribes who are there. It also includes the munafiqeen, who are the hypocrites. So we consider these people to be disbelievers because they actually pretended to be Muslim to enjoy some worldly benefit. It was just politically the best thing to do at that time, that let's just act like we're Muslims or just say we're Muslim because that's the safer option. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention to these people as well. And He also addresses the new Muslims as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about people who had just recently entered into Islam, primarily the Ansar, and as well as some people from Mecca who had just come in, and they had also accepted Islam as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives commandments and He tells them, okay, you should do these things, you should avoid these things. So we'll see that there are prohibitions, we'll also see that there are commandments in this surah. One of the primary things and one of the staples of this surah is the large amount of stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala narrates for us. There's a large number of stories that He subhanahu wa ta'ala brings. So from the very beginning we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the story of the first man. Okay, so the first large surah that we read, Surah Al-Baqarah, has the story of the first man, and that is the first story that is narrated to us, which is the story of Adam alayhi salam and Iblis, the shaitan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Hawa alayhi salam, their incident in Jannah, what happens on earth after they are descended from the heavens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then immediately moves to the story of Musa alayhi salam. Right after the story of Adam alayhi salam, He moves to the story of Musa alayhi salam, where the namesake for this surah comes from. The namesake of this surah, which is Surah Al-Baqarah, it comes from the story of Musa alayhi salam, Bani Israel, and the heifer, okay, the Baqarah, which is the cow, and that is the namesake of this surah. Why is it called Al-Baqarah, the cow? Is because of that incident, that story. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions several other prophets. He mentions Ibrahim alayhi salam a few times in this surah. Ibrahim alayhi salam, his story comes a few times, of him and Namrud, who was the tyrant king at one time, and Ibrahim alayhi salam and his son as they built the Kaaba. Ibrahim alayhi salam, and an example that is given with Ibrahim alayhi salam. We'll make a short mention of that later on. Sulaiman alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of him to essentially purify him of claims that were made against him. Unfair and untrue claims that were made against him by certain groups of people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions those claims, and He says that Sulaiman alayhi salam is free of those statements that other people have made against him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also makes mention of Uzair, and He does this, Uzair alayhi salam, also known as Ezra. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this indirectly. So there are certain stories in the Quran where He subhanahu wa ta'ala will make mention of somebody and He will make their name very clear and evident. Other times He will make an indirect ishara towards an indication towards that person. and we have to look to our mufassirin, we have to look to our hadith, we have to look to other sources to determine who that person is, who it's referencing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also makes mention of the story of Dawood and Jalut. Okay, Dawood alayhi salam, David. Okay, so this is the story of David and Goliath. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions that story. So there are several stories that are in this surah, and there are others as well. And there are several parables, several examples that are given, so we can take heed from them. And this is arguably the best way to tell, or to teach a lesson, by way of a story. You tell the story of someone and you say, okay, here are, events that have already transpired. Now you should look at this and, either be like this person or don't be like this person. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this to tell the people who are living in Medina specifically, okay, especially the Jewish tribes who are living there. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's why He makes mention of prophets who are held very high esteem. They're held in very high esteem in Jewish theology. For example, Sulaiman alayhi salam. Solomon is looked up to in Jewish theology. Musa alayhi salam, of course, he is the patriarch of the Jewish faith, as well as Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is considered the father figure for all of the Abrahamic faiths. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of all of these prophets. So this story, this surah itself, is primarily addressed to the Jewish tribes, the Muslims, and the munafiqeen, those hypocrites. The next surah which we will do later is Surah Ali Imran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Christians. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses An-Nasara, then He also addresses the believers as well as the hypocrites. So this one is for the Jewish tribes, and the next surah that we will do, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Christians. And the thing is, the Christians, they were not a majority. They were like a very, very, very few select people who are Christian living in Medina anyways. Even in the Hijaz area, there's a very few number of people who were attributed to the Christian faith at that time specifically. What does the Prophet ﷺ say about this surah? So let's just mention a couple of ahadith which talk about the fada'il, the virtues of this surah. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard that sometimes somebody will move into a house and then they will have like a Quran recital at their house. So it's like a new house that they move into. This actually has precedent. Okay, this is not something that is just baseless and just made it up out of nowhere. There's several hadith where the Prophet ﷺ encourages reading Quran in the house. He encourages reading Quran in the house, and he gives reason for it. So there's a hadith that's narrated in Muslim, that's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, in which he says, "La taj'alu buyutakum maqabir." The Prophet ﷺ says, "Do not make your homes into graveyards." Do not make your homes into graveyards. So basically, that is a house in which there is no Quran read in that house. The Prophet ﷺ attributes it to a graveyard, where basically there's nothing living. So that house is considered, it's only dead people, even though we're still living in that home. So the Prophet ﷺ, he makes that comparison between a graveyard and a house in which Quran is not read. إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنْفِرُ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ الَّذِي تُقْرَأُ فِيهِ سُورَةُ الْبَقَرَةِ. Indeed, the shayateen, the devils, they will run away from a home, from a house in which Surah Al-Baqarah is read. So I know this was a practice of our teachers, that when they moved into a new house or something, at least in the home they would read Surah Al-Baqarah, at the very least. And they would try and read it in all of the rooms that they would have Surah Al-Baqarah read. And this is a hadith in Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ encourages reading Surah Al-Baqarah specifically in the home of the person, and shayateen will run from it. And the reason for this, the connection between shayateen and Surah Al-Baqarah, is the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam. Sulaiman alayhi salam, and you will notice if you read the tafsir, and you will notice the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam and the jinn, and the whole story, it talks about how we can seek protection from the jinn, from black magic, etc. by recital of this surah. Now let's look at the second hadith, which is attributed to Abu Umama radiallahu anhu, in which he says that I heard the Prophet ﷺ say this: اقرأوا القرآن فإنه يأتي يوم القيامة شفيعا لأصحابه. The Prophet ﷺ gives a very general command. He gives a very general encouragement. He says, read the Quran. اقرأوا. This is for everyone. Okay, it's not for a single person. He says, all of you, you should read the Quran. فإنه يأتي يوم القيامة شفيعا لأصحابه. Because this Quran, indeed, it comes as an intercessor for its companion on the day of judgment. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam calls, the person who reads the Quran a companion of the Quran. He calls him the Sahib al-Quran, the person who reads the Quran. He's not just, just a reader. He considers him a companion, a person who you spend considerable amount of time with. He says that it will come for you as an intercessor on the day of judgment. To understand what an intercessor is, it's basically the Quran itself will come and appeal on your behalf to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will come on your behalf and will tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, well, this person, he used to give me my due right. He used to read me. He used to give me the due respect that is that is supposed to be given to the Quran, that is supposed to be given to the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he continues and he specifies. First was the general command for reading the entire Quran. Then he says, "Iqra'u Zahrawain." The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, read the two. Now the word for Zahrawain is translated in a few ways. One of them is the bright ones. Okay, so these are two bright surahs, or it's the two beautiful smelling surahs. Okay. So again, this is, there's a very deep meaning to why these specific words are used. Al-Baqarah wa Surah Ali Imran. The Prophet ﷺ now he specifies what these two surahs are, and he says Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Ali Imran. Surah Baqarah, Surah Ali Imran. فإنهما تأتيان يوم القيامة كأنهما غمامتان أو قال كأنهما غيايتان أو قال كأنهما فرقتان or فرقان من طير. So the Prophet ﷺ he says that these two surahs, they will come on the day of judgment as if they are two flocks, okay, two flocks of birds which will hover over a person, or they will be like two clouds which will hover over a person and they will give that person shade on the day of judgment. And that is, of course, we know that the day of judgment is يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّ. It's that day where there is no shade, and people will be up to their eyes in sweat. People will be struggling on that day. But these two surahs, the Prophet ﷺ says that they will serve as clouds. They will give that person relief on the day when there is no shade. These will be the two things that give that person shade. And then he continues and he says, اقرأوا سورة البقرة فإن أخذها بركة وتركها حسرة ولا تستطيعها بطلة. And this is the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ, that in his speech he was not a poet. However, he just had like such a nice ring to the way that he would say his speech and his kalam. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says that, you should read these two surahs, because the person who takes hold of them, okay, basically like he or she actually, makes them a part of their life. Akhd, okay, akhadha means to actually take something, to grab something. He says that in that is barakah, and that is blessing, وَتَرْكَهَا حَسْرَةً. He says that if you leave it, then there is great regret. The person will say, and maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, the person will not feel regret, but definitely on the day of judgment, when they will see that other people have, this guy has shade. Where is this guy? I'm over here, sweating bullets, and the other guy is just chilling over there. Why? And he says that it's because this person, they made use of their time. They made use of the time. They actually took the time to read these two surahs, and they had the blessings of these two surahs. Meanwhile, this person is living in regret, hasra. وَلَا تَسْتَطِيعُهَا بَطَلًا. And this word batala is an interesting word, because there's several definitions and several ways to translate it. Some people say it means magicians, some say it means those who try to harm you. Basically, anyone who tries to harm you will not be able to by way of these two surahs. By the protection that these two surahs offer you, you will be protected from, sihr, black magic, ayn, nazar, all of these things, you'll be protected from by way of these two surahs. So let's look at, we already talked a little bit about the synopsis of this surah, but let's look at it just a little bit more, in just slightly more depth. So this surah, like I mentioned, it contains stories and it contains examples, commandments, prohibitions, and these were, mostly they were directed towards, we will talk about how they were directed towards the Muslims, but they were also directed towards the Jewish tribes who were living there, because this was also a form of da'wah toward them. Okay, towards them, for example, the three tribes who were Banu Qurayza, and there was Banu Nadir, Banu Qaynuqa. So these three tribes, the Jewish tribes who were living there, this was a means of da'wah to them. Because here we are in this surah, and throughout the Quran, we are talking so highly about those prophets and those people that the Jewish tribes also looked up to. Okay, it's not like they considered them lowly. They actually looked up to them. And then when we say as Muslims that, hey, they're actually very special to us as well, then this is a means of kind of bringing them closer to our faith and seeing that, okay, well, you know what, maybe they actually have something here. And then it's also an address to the hypocrites. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also talks about the hypocrites. And throughout the Quran, He subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of the hypocrites. And He specifically calls them, those people who have zayghun fi qulubihim. They have, like maradun fi qulubihim. They have some kind of illness, they have some kind of deviation in their hearts. Basically, it's inside. You can't tell from the outside that this person is a hypocrite. The person might come in and pray in the first row, but in their heart there is something that is actually twisting their interpretation or their vision or their view of Islam and the commandments of the Prophet ﷺ, etc. So this surah, it implores people to seek guidance as well as redemption, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells, He makes mention of different nations throughout the Quran and specifically in the surah about people who are lost, who were doomed. And it says that, look, don't be like these people. Seek redemption. Try and do the right thing. These people realized way too late. Don't be like them. And then he subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he addresses the Ansar and the Muhajirin. The Ansar are those people who were, they were natives of Medina. The Muhajirin are those people who emigrated from Mecca to Medina. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells them about, the things that you should do, things that you shouldn't do. For example, he gives them commands for battle, which we'll actually talk about a little bit, that he makes halal for them fighting. He talks about Ramadan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he actually brings in how to pray your salah, basically. Not the details of the salah per se, but more so of just commandments towards salah, etc. The Prophet tells us about all of these things in a hadith. He details, the commandments and how things should and should not be done in the hadith. And one of the interesting things that I'm sure you guys have heard the story, that Umar radiallahu anhu, it took him several years to actually memorize this surah. Several years to memorize this surah. And the reason was not because of a lack of memory or something like that. The Arabs at that time specifically were known for their incredible memories. However, Umar radiallahu anhu, it took him a long time to memorize the surah, because whenever he would memorize something, he would not continue until he would not continue in his memorization until he had put that into practice. The amount that he memorized, until he had fully brought it into his life and realized the reality of it, he would not memorize the next part. Meanwhile, we memorize the entire Quran and we don't even have like the first verse in our lives. So it's not so much about the quantity that we are memorizing or we are reading, especially in this Ramadan. Don't think that, I have to read the Quran 15 times. Okay, you read the Quran 15 times, but you don't understand a word that you read, and it doesn't make a change in your life. So are we truly reading it, or are we just, skimming through it? It's just like a person, he can pray 100 raka'at. A person can pray, 100 rak'ahs in tahajjud, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give that person anything. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says this in a hadith, and especially for us now that we are fasting, that, a person, he can fast the entire day, and he can pray the entire night, but he gets nothing from his fasting except thirst and hunger, and he gets nothing from praying all night except tiredness and, sleepiness. Why? Because the person does not have any essence to their worship. The person has no essence to their worship. Okay, the fasting does not actually help them leave sin. They continue to do the same sins that they were doing. The prayer that they're doing, they're not doing it for the sake of Allah. They don't have any concentration in their prayer. So you can pray 100 raka'at, or you can pray 2 raka'at, where a person has sincere concentration and they're doing it for the sake of Allah. So there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference. Now, let's actually move on to a little bit of the tafsir. Before we begin, let's look at, just the very first part of the surah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he begins the surah with Alif Lam Mim. Alif Lam Mim. So many surahs in the Quran actually begin with these letters, and these are known as Al-Huruf Al-Muqatta'at. Al-Huruf Al-Muqatta'at. The disjointed letters. The disjointed letters. So there are 29 surahs essentially in the entire Quran which start with these types of letters. Not specifically Alif Lam Mim. There's a different variation of them in these 29 surahs. So there's 114 surahs total, and from them, 29 of them begin with Al-Huruf Al-Muqatta'at. Now, there is no explicit narration of the Prophet ﷺ which tells us what it means. So we don't truly know what they mean. Some scholars and some tabi'een, they have tried to, give their interpretation of it. However, the safest option, and this is something that Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he brings in his tafsir, he says that, it's best to avoid giving a tafsir of these verses, or these letters, and, the verses that begin with these letters, because we don't know. We cannot say with certainty that this is exactly what it means. Now, this is interesting because we know that, these letters, if they're combined, they actually make up words. So we know what the words mean, but we don't know what these individual letters mean. So we know what all the other verses essentially mean, but we don't know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just brings a certain letter. Okay, like Qaf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this entire surah with just the word Qaf, with just that letter. We have no idea what it specifically itself, it's supposed to designate. We don't know. And by saying I don't know, this is a sign of humility. This is a sign of humility. And this is the first surah that we read right after Fatiha. This is the first surah that we read, Alif Lam Mim, where a person right away they say that, I have no idea what that means. Okay, I know what the next verse means, but I don't know what the very first thing means. And this means that, God has certain types of knowledge that, I can't go into it thinking that, I'm just going to understand everything that God says. No, we don't. This is where a person has to show some type of intellectual humility. Intellectual humility. We might know everything. Or we might think we know everything. We might think that, we can go to Mars, we can go to the moon, we can do all of these things that can work out, quantum physics, but I have no idea what Alif Lam Mim means. And when we understand that, when we realize that creates that humility within a person where they're able to say that, there are things that are beyond my grasp. Inshallah, one day Allah will explain this to me. This is not the time for it. This is not the moment for it. So we go into the Quran accepting that, you know what, there are things that I'm not going to understand. There are things that we will not understand. And there are definitely verses that, you know, I come across many times myself, and I'm thinking, okay, I have to go ask my teachers, I have to ask my classmates, I have to go and read several tafasir to try and figure out what is being talked about here. Even though I know the words, I know what the translation says. Even if I know the translation, even if I know the word, I still might not know the meaning behind that verse itself, even though it's so clear and apparent, but I might not know the depth behind it. And this is in many verses of the Quran. So if you find yourself, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. Well, perhaps it doesn't make sense to you, perhaps you don't understand, but someone might. So in that case, you know, this should encourage us to go and seek knowledge. Seek knowledge from a person who might actually know what this means. And specifically those people who are qualified and trained to tell us these things. So that's just how this surah begins. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins it with Alif Lam Mim, which are, as we mentioned, the huruf al-muqatta'at, the disjointed letters that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins several surahs with in this Quran. Now, another interesting thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this surah with ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ. So He doesn't say هَذَا الْكِتَابِ. Now, the Arabic-speaking brothers or anyone who's taken, an introduction to Arabic class, they will know the difference between hada and dhalika. Hada means this, okay, so like hada, this is my glasses, these are my glasses, or dhalika means that, okay, so you point at something, you say, so dhalika is for something far away, hada is for something right here. So dhalika literally means that. But if you look in the translations, they will say this book. So they don't translate it word for word, firstly. So first thing is Alif Lam Mim, where we say that, you know what, I don't know what that means. Secondly, the word dhalika comes up, which says that book. Wait, I thought the book is right in front of me. We should be saying hadha al-kitab, right? Why are we not saying this? So one of my teachers, he gave a very beautiful explanation. It was a very simple one. He says, dhalika al-kitab, it refers to the reality of the book. Okay, the Quran itself is not a physical text. Quran is not. This physical thing is not the Quran. This is a mushaf. This is a mushaf. The Quran itself is the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is the meanings behind the words. That is the Quran, the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the reality is not something, it is beyond the physical. It is beyond whatever is present in front of us. Hadha al-kitab, this book is referring to this physical text in front of me. Okay, but when we say dhalika al-kitab, we are referring to the reality of the book. Okay, the reality of the book, of the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. There is no doubt in this book. هدى للمتقين. This is guidance for the people of taqwa. Guidance for the people of taqwa. Taqwa is, what is taqwa? So some people will translate taqwa as fear. If somebody throws a snake in here, I'm going to run the opposite direction. That's fear. That's fear. I'm not going to run away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just to say that it is fear of Allah, it's not doing justice to the word taqwa. It's not doing justice to the word taqwa. Taqwa is God consciousness, where a person is always aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes that awareness creates fear within a person. Sometimes that awareness creates solace within a person, comfort. If you're going through a difficulty in your life, and you're going through some serious hardship, then taqwa at that moment means, I know Allah is there for me. I know God is there. Like, yeah, things are terrible right now, but inshallah things will get better because God is watching over me. So even if you're completely alone, that taqwa that you have, okay, it gives you comfort. Other times, a person might be completely alone and be inclined towards sin. But then they start, right when the person is about to commit a sin, they might be afflicted with fear. That is that taqwa. That is taqwa at that moment where the person is afflicted by the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it keeps them away. So that same word, for one person it is solace and comfort. For another person it is fear. Okay? So this is taqwa, where a person is conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right before this we say is huda. Huda is guidance. In Surah Al-Fatiha, we talked about seeking guidance. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us right here, right after we ask for guidance, He says, you wanted guidance? Here it is. It's in this surah. Okay, we have guidance for you in this entire Quran, and it begins with Surah Al-Baqarah. It begins with Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the second verse right away that in this book, there is guidance for the people who are conscious of God. Basically, if a person does not have God consciousness, the person does not even want to be aware of God. The person doesn't care for God whatsoever. Then it's not going to guide them. You have to come into reading this book actually wanting to be guided. You have to want to be guided. You have to want someone, to tell you that this is right, this is wrong, do this, don't do this. If you don't want to hear it, then it's just going to fall on deaf ears. It's going to fall on deaf ears if you don't want to hear it at all. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right away just tells us from just the first verse, hey, be humble, you're not going to know everything that's in here. And the second verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the reality of it is far beyond the physical. Okay, there's a metaphysical reality behind it. There's no doubt in it. Just because you don't understand, okay, just because you don't understand the realities of this book does not mean that there's a doubt in it. You should not hold doubt in it. That's next. Hudan lil muttaqin. It is guidance, but it's only for guidance for the people of taqwa. Basically, the people who actually they want to have God tell them what to do and what not to do. If you don't want that, then it's not going to help you. So in the first two verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just tells us right away, all of the Quran just right away is just pretty much summarized. That what's the purpose of all of this? Okay, you're going to benefit from it if you want to truly benefit from it. That's the way that we should go into the Quran. When it comes to reading it anytime. Don't just go into, oh, it's Friday, I got to read, Surah Kahf and just quickly read it and just put it away and you're done. No, you should open up Surah Al-Kahf and think that, why does, the Prophet ﷺ encourage me so much to read Surah Al-Kahf on Friday? What's the benefit of that? I need to know what the benefit. Why do I read Surah Al-Fatiha, over a dozen times a day? What's the purpose of reading this one surah time and time and time and time again? Why? So we should go into it wanting to understand. Now, one of the really cool things about the Quran itself, and specifically this surah, is that you'll find many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will structure a surah in a different way. Okay, so this surah it has a ring structure. Basically, you can kind of fold it. Okay, we kind of talked about this in Surah Al-Fatiha, so you can also fold this surah in half. So the way we would do that, because this is 286 verses, so it's quite a bit, that let's talk about the different portions of this surah, talk about the different parts of this surah. Firstly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He begins talking about faith and disbelief. Okay? Faith and disbelief. Basically, iman and kufr. And that is the very first portion of this surah. The very first portion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right after the first two verses, what does He say? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Those people who believe in that which is unseen. The people, they believe in the unseen. So right away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is already talking about faith. And then He will talk about those people who are hypocrites, who don't really have true belief. They claim to have belief, but they really don't. And then He talks about those other people, whose belief has become skewed, and now they're teetering on the edge between belief and disbelief. So that's the first portion, which is about 20 verses. 20 verses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about people of belief and disbelief. Then He subhanahu wa ta'ala moves, okay, to the second portion. Okay? So the second portion, He subhanahu wa ta'ala now will talk about His creation and His knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation and His knowledge. He does this by way of the story of Adam alayhi salam. In that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first, He creates Adam. He creates Adam from nothing. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates him from clay, but essentially it's from nothing. It's a matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself created out of nothing. And He does this to demonstrate not only His ability, His qudra, but also His knowledge. Why so? Because the angels, they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they say that, you're making someone, they say right here, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَن يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the angels that I'm going to place a khalifa on this earth. I'm going to place a vicegerent on this earth. They say, are you really going to put on the earth the one who will cause fasad, who will cause corruption on the earth, and who will spill blood? So right away they're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala something that they cannot comprehend. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Indeed, I know that which you don't know. I know that which you do not know. So right away, this is the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His ability, as well as His knowledge. And this, of course, this continues to the story of Adam alayhi salam, and then Iblis, Shaitan, how he deceives Adam alayhi salam and Hawa alayhi salam, and what goes on after. So that's the second portion, and it continues again for about another 20 verses. Next, the third portion that we talk about is the deliverance of the law to Bani Israel, their sharia, their prophet telling them, you should do this, you should avoid this, which is Musa alayhi salam talking to the Jewish tribes. And this is the story of Al-Baqarah itself. Which is where, again, the namesake of this surah comes from. So that's the third part. Let's move on to the fourth part. Okay, this continues for a long time. Okay, because Musa alayhi salam, Bani Israel, it's not just like a very quick little short story. No, it's a generational thing. It goes on. There's a lot of depth to it. So this is about 60 verses. About 60 verses continue. And that was the third part. The fourth part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Ibrahim. He talks about Ibrahim alayhi salam. So then He tells him about, how He tells us about Ibrahim alayhi salam building the Kaaba. He tells us how Ibrahim alayhi salam specifically made dua. Ibrahim alayhi salam made dua for the future generations who would come. And future generations referring to his generation, his progeny who would come, as well as for the people who would visit the Kaaba itself. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He concludes this part with mention of his dua that he makes. So if we go to, I believe this is verse 123, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Ibrahim alayhi salam, وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ. This is actually something that, Huffaz have to be very careful of. Be very, very careful how you read this verse right here. وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ بِكَلِمَاتٍ فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ. When Ibrahim alayhi salam was tested by his Lord, and Ibrahim alayhi salam, he fulfilled his test, and Ibrahim alayhi salam was that one specific person who passed every single test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him, without hesitation, without any doubt whatsoever in his answers to his test. Ibrahim alayhi salam passed with flying colors. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention. Okay, he makes mention of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam. وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا بَلَدًا آمِنًا. Oh Allah, make this land, referring to Mecca al-Mukarramah. He's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this land a land of peace. Okay, رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا بَلَدًا آمِنًا وَارْزُقْ أَهْلَهُ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ. And give the people who come to here and to come to this land, the people who live in this land, أهله, its people. He give them rizq, give them sustenance from min al-thamarat. Al-thamarat, this is basically fruits, vegetation, rizq, okay, sustenance. Man amana minhum billahi wal yawm al-akhir. To those people who believe, from amongst these people, to those who believe in Allah and the Day of Judgment. قال ومن كفر فأمتعه قليلا ثم اضطره إلى عذاب النار وبئس المصير. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he makes a statement. He says, but those people who disbelieve from amongst them, who disbelieve, I will give them a respite. I will give them a short amount of respite, where basically they will live lives of fun and enjoyment for a short amount of time. But then after, they have a pretty severe punishment waiting for them, and indeed that is a terrible destination. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how Ibrahim alayhi salam, he began to build the Kaaba with Ismail alayhi salam. وَإِذْ يَرْفَوْ إِبْرَاهِيمُ الْقَوَائِدَ مِنَ الْبَيْتِ وَإِسْمَاعِيلُ. And then Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail, his son, they are both raising, the qawaid, the foundations of the Kaaba. They're basically building them. The son is helping the father work on the Kaaba itself and building it. At this moment, they are making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are making dua. Not only are they doing such a sacred act, they're doing a very sacred act, but they are also making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this act itself. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا. O our Lord, accept from us. O our Lord, accept from us this deed that we are doing. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. You are the one who hears all. You are the one who has all knowledge. You are hearing the dua that we are making. You have complete knowledge about what is in our hearts. So this is the same thing. We're fasting all day. We're reading Taraweeh now that we're reading at home these days. And we are listening to Tafasir. We're reading the Quran, doing all of these things. We should be making sincere dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The actions that we are doing, sure, it's definitely, very noble act of fasting and prayer and everything. This is compared to a prophet building the Kaaba itself. And yet, look, the Prophet, whose son is also a Prophet, what are they doing? They're making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sincerely asking Him, oh Allah, accept this effort that we are making. If a Prophet is there with his son building the Kaaba, which is the holiest place for us, and they are making dua, sincerely asking Him, accept our actions, how much are we in need of doing the same thing? How much are we in need of saying, Allah, accept from me this fast? I know I definitely did not do it justice. I was fasting, and yet I was talking about people, and I was listening to things, I was looking at things, I was saying things that I shouldn't have been doing. All of these things I shouldn't have been doing, and I still did it. I'm really afraid that you will not accept this fast from me. So for 30 days we're fasting, 29 days we're fasting. We should be sincerely asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, pleading with Him, that please accept this effort of mine and this hard work that I did, even though I did not do it justice. And then they continue making the dua. They say, رَبَّنَا وَجْعَلْنَا مُسْلِمَيْنِ لَكَ وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِنَا ummatan muslimatan. And they say that, oh Allah, make us Muslims, make us believers, make us people who submit to you, as well as those from our progeny, make them, a submitting nation. Submit to who? Laka. They submit to you. وَأَرِنَا مَنَاسِكَنَا وَتُبْ عَلَيْنَا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ. And then they also seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So right after, we do an action, and then we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept that action, and we ask Him to forgive us for the shortcomings in that action. which is exactly what these prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such notable prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they did this. They did such an incredible act, and then they ask Allah to accept that act, and then they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them for any shortcomings that they might have had. So this is a perfect recipe for us. Okay? Perfect recipe for us. رَبَّنَا وَابْعَثْ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِكَ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. This verse is incredibly powerful. This is when they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If anyone's wondering, this is verse 129. Verse 129. So they are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? This is Ibrahim alayhi salam, he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, send from amongst them, basically those people who are going to live in Makkah after me, people from our progeny, people who will come generations and generations later. Send from them a Rasul, a prophet, who will come from them. يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِكَ, who will read upon them, who will read to them your verses. Okay, he will do tilawah of your verses, your ayat. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, and he will teach them the book. He will teach them the book. So this is not just that, okay, you know what, the Prophet ﷺ did not just come here that, okay, here's the book, I'm done with my mission, have fun. No, that's not it. Nabi ﷺ, he himself, he brought the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he brought the Quran, the kitab of Allah. Then after that, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, then he taught them the book. He taught them the verses. So the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ holds extremely, extremely high status in our faith. Because what does the Quran want us to do? The Prophet ﷺ was a walking, talking Quran. Aisha radiallahu anha was asked about the khuluq of the Prophet ﷺ. How was his conduct? She said, Nabi ﷺ, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. He said that, you know, his entire being, okay, his character and conduct was the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ was the perfect embodiment of what the Quran dictates to us, tells us what to do, what not to do. Nabi ﷺ did that to the T, perfectly. So these are the parts of his mission. Is number one, to actually bring the verses. After that, to actually teach the verses, teach, you know, the deeper meaning behind them. وَالْحِكْمَةَ and wisdom. This hikmah, according to many scholars, this is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the things that he told us from himself. This is that wisdom that he was given. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and purify them. This is, you know, that tazkiyah of the nafs. This is what many people, they say that, you know, it's not just so much the external. It's not all about the external. It's not about what you see. There's also that hidden reality of a person. Okay, the metaphysical, which is beyond that, the temporary physical. Okay, it is that which will continue with you, which is the soul, purifying the soul of the person, purifying them from maladies which are not seen on the outside. Things like hasad, jealousy, things like anger. Okay, ghadab, which is the person, it's stuck in a person. You know, a person is very quick to temper. These kinds of things, they need to be rectified. The sins that person falls into constantly, you might not see them on the outside, but inside there is something that is drawing and pulling that person towards that sin or towards that act. These kinds of things, this is purified and cleansed from a person through tazkiyah. So these are the four things, the four parts of the prophetic mission of the Prophet ﷺ, which we mentioned. Number one is to actually bring the verses of the Quran. Number two is to actually teach the verses. Not just read them, but after reading them, teach the meaning behind them. And then after that, his own ahadith, his own sunnah, what the Prophet ﷺ said and did outside of the Quran itself, outside of the literal words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then finally, the tazkiyah of the Prophet ﷺ, which was him advocating for the purity of the nafs, okay, purifying all of those internal maladies of a person. So this was the fourth part, okay? We're still dividing the structure of this surah. The first part we talked about faith and disbelief, iman and kufr. Then we talked about Allah's creation and His knowledge. And then we talked about the deliverance of law, where we gave, you know, the sharia of Bani Israel, Musa alayhi salam and Bani Israel, which is the third part. The fourth part is this whole story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, okay? You know, him being tested, and then him building the Kaaba, him making dua. Now the fifth part, this is the interesting part. This is the pivot, okay? This is like the middle of the surah. This is the pivot. So actually go to verse 243. Yeah, 243 of this surah. This surah, it comprises totally of 286 verses. 286 verses. So in these 286 verses, there are 9 parts. So this is the fifth part that we are doing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this verse, this is the pivot verse. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the command essentially to move the qibla, the direction that the Muslims were praying from Jerusalem towards Mecca. So the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, for about 16 to 17 months, the Muslims who were in Medina after they had emigrated from Mecca to Medina, they were actually facing Jerusalem. They were facing Jerusalem, and they were praying towards that, towards Baytul Maqdis. They were praying in that direction until Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, He told them that turn around and now pray towards Mecca itself. This verse, in which Allah Subhanahu wa Taala told them this was done in a specific masjid, by the way. It's in a specific masjid. You can actually go and visit it in Medina. It's known as Masjid Qiblatain. Okay, the masjid of the two qiblas. Alhamdulillah, we had the opportunity to visit it recently, and if you go there, there's the qibla is facing one way, and then you can actually turn around and see that on the wall behind you, right after you walk into the door, there's like an engraving on the top of the wall. It's like a musalla. It's a jan namaz that's actually engraved on top of. It's a sajjada that's engraved on top of the wall, which is the direction that the Muslims were commanded to turn to after. In this verse, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, not only does He tell them to turn from one direction to another, He Subhanahu wa Taala, He actually calls the believers. He Subhanahu wa Taala actually calls the believers a very interesting word. Okay, and He says, let me actually pull up the verse. He says that وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, sorry, I said 240. I meant to say 143. Yeah, this is a small mistake. So there's 286 verses. So we should go to verse 143. I was looking for it, thinking, where am I at right now? Okay, yeah, it's over here. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, this is at the beginning of the second juz. Okay, so the first sipara, first juz, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala just talks about basically Bani Israel. He talks about what we talked about earlier. Okay, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, Adam alayhi salam, believers and disbelievers. Talks about that in the first juz of the Quran, the first sipara of the Quran, first part, first chapter. Then he moves to the second part. Okay, now we Subhanahu wa Taala moves right away to the next part when he says سَيَقُولُ السُّفَحَاءُ مِنَ النَّاسِ. This is how the second verse, the second chapter begins. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is talking about the pivot. Okay, the pivot, turning from Jerusalem towards Mecca. And He says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. And indeed we have made you, talking to the believers, we have made you a middle nation. We have made you a middle nation. And this verse is the middle verse in the surah. It's the middle verse in the surah. I guarantee you, the Prophet ﷺ did not, try and keep a track of this like throughout the 9 or 10 years that it took for this surah to be revealed. That okay, what verse goes where, and let me just make sure that this is the middle verse. No, he didn't. This was specifically sent down by Allah Subhanahu wa Taala in this divine order. But this is the middle part of the surah. This is the middle part. This is the pivot of the surah, where you turn from one direction to another direction. Okay, talking about the Yahud, talking about the Christians, talking about the Jews, the Jewish tribes specifically who were living in Medina, turning from Jerusalem where they used to worship, towards Mecca, which is in the opposite direction. We turn that way, and the rest of the surah, which is the opposite, the other side of the surah, talks only about the believers, talks only about the Muslims. So we went from addressing the non-believers and talking about their history to now talking about the believers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now He begins and He talks about Muslims. And now He will talk about the commandments that are given to Muslims. He will talk about stories and things that are relevant to us. These are also relevant to us, but He says, okay, this is now all about you guys. These are parables specifically that I'm giving for you. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala does this by way of changing literally the direction that they were praying from one to another. Okay, now we are changing our style as well. Okay, our style of address to you as well. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he used to actually anticipate the turning of the Qibla. He was looking forward to turning of the Qibla. And Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, He makes mention, He says, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ. He says that, we have seen, the way that you turn and you kind of, you look up towards the heavens when you're praying, because you're waiting for the command to come down that, hey, turn around and pray towards the Kaaba. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was looking forward to doing that for a long time. So this is one of the very interesting things about the surah itself, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the middle of the surah specifically, that verse which talks about the Muslims themselves being the middle nation. The middle verse talks about them being the middle nation, and then that is also the same verse that tells us to turn around and pray in the other direction. So now we change direction in this surah as well, and we talk about a whole different set of topics. So that's the fifth part of the surah. Let's move to the sixth part, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Muslims being tested. Okay, He talks about the Muslims being tested. And in this part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He essentially tells us how the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam was accepted. The dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam is accepted in this part. And this is from verses essentially 153 to 177. Okay, 153 to 177. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Makkah itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically talks about Makkah, and He talks about, all of the things that were given to the people who come and they come to Makkah and they come to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is all because of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the summation of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam. If you go to Makkah today, the fact that you can go over there and they have a buffet lined out for you, at every breakfast is a testament to the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam being accepted. There's nothing grows in Makkah. Okay, that's a desert. Seriously, nothing grows over there. The fact that we even have water there is a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Zamzam water, where does that water come from? We don't really know. Okay, so the fact that we have all of these fruits and foods and everything else coming from all over the world, is a testament to the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam being accepted. That all of the people who come to Mecca and they come to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will give them, rizq minat thamarat, from those food, from those foods that you and I, we wonder, like, when did this get here? Where are you going to grow these things in Medina, or in Mecca? So this part of the surah here, this is the 6th part of the surah. It talks about the dua of Ibrahim as-salam being accepted. Okay, actually let's go on and then we'll talk about how we connect all of this. Actually, we'll just do it right now. It shouldn't be too difficult. So we just talked right now about the dua of Ibrahim as-salam being accepted. Okay, so this was the 5th part. The 4th part, this was the 6th part. The 5th part was the qibla being the new qibla being from Jerusalem to Mecca. So that was the pivot point. So the part before that was Ibrahim alayhi salam's dua. Okay, so Ibrahim alayhi salam's dua is here, and then the pivot, and then the acceptance of Ibrahim alayhi salam's dua is here. Okay, and now we talk about the next part down here, which is the sharia that is given to the believers. The sharia that is given to the believers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, this is many verses. This is like a good, almost like 60 verses. Okay, from 178 to like 253, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the business dealings for believers. He talks about divorce. He talks about different things that are, written down for us, our sharia specifically. So what do we talk about when it came to the 3rd part? This is the 3rd to last part. The 3rd part of this surah was the sharia that is given to Bani Israel, that is given from Musa alayhi salam to the Bani Israel. So their sharia, which is the 3rd part, the 3rd to last part is our sharia that is given to us. Okay, so now let's go to the 2nd to last part. The 2nd to last part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about His creation and His knowledge. Just like up here, the 2nd part that we talked about was Allah's creation and His knowledge. He subhanahu wa ta'ala did this by way of the story of Adam alayhi salam, the story of Iblis. Remember the angels asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answering them? That was His creation, that was His knowledge. In the 2nd to last part, He also talks about His creation and His knowledge. So actually we can look at that specifically. So let's go to verse 257, I think. Yeah. So 257. Okay. So in these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us about actually 258, which is the next one. He tells us about Ibrahim alayhi salam. He talks about him debating Namrud. We talked about it earlier when we mentioned the stories that are mentioned in this surah, that this is one of those stories. Ibrahim alayhi salam debating Namrud, who was a tyrant king at that time. Okay? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, He makes the indication towards an unknown man. Okay? A man who is implicitly or indirectly attributed, the attribution of this story is indirectly towards Ezra. Okay? Uzair alayhi salam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على أروشها. So this is the story of Ezra when he actually passed by a village, and he passed by a town, and he saw that it was completely desolate, right? It's like it's in ruins. And so he says that قال أن يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها. He said, how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to give life to this after it has already become, dust and dirt? There's nothing here. So it's not like he is, doubting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he's wondering. This is from amazement. He's trying to understand that how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give this? How is He going to bring all of this back? How is He going to bring all of this back? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right away, He shows him. Just like the angels, they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not because they had any doubt whatsoever, right? But because of, their curiosity. They wanted to know, right? What is the wisdom behind this? What is the capability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala behind this? So right away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives life to this man, or gives death to this man. He says that, فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ مِيَةَ عَامٍ. Right away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes this guy out, 100 years, he's just knocked out. Right? ثُمَّ بَعَثَهُ. And then after that, He brings him back. After 100 years, He brings him back. قال قال كم لبثت قال لبثت يوما أو بعض يوم. After this, a voice says to him, he hears a voice that says that, how long did you stay asleep? How long were you, knocked out? And he says that, I think I was knocked out for like a day or perhaps part of a day. قال بل لبثت 100 عام. He said, actually, for 100 years you've been out. You've been sleeping for 100 years. فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنى. Why don't you look at your food and your drink that you have with you? It has not gone bad. It has not gone bad. How? This is the qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His creation and His knowledge. Okay? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues the story of how He brings life, and right in front of Him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings, His animal back to life right in front of Him, and He actually recreates the animal and He sees it happen right away. And in the same I guess, line of storytelling, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the next story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, where Ibrahim alayhi salam, he does not doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. Ibrahim alayhi salam says to Allah, "Oh my Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. Show me how you give life to the dead." قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He asked him, he says, do you not believe? And قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. He says, no, of course I do. I absolutely do. However, I just want, my heart to be at ease. I want my heart to be at ease. Now, this is not Ibrahim alayhi salam doubting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like Ezra, Uzair did not doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The angels who came before, they did not doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They wanted to know, the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hidden. Not all of it, of course, but just, in regard to this specific instance. So in this same way, this is why he does not ask, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَتُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. Do you really give life to the dead? He says, كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. I want to see how you do it. I know you do it. Just show me how it's done. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, okay, I'll show you. Just like Ezra, Uzair was like, he's thinking, he's like, how would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give life to this? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this same, place that has been in ruins for who knows how long, for decades and centuries, look. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes him away takes his life for 100 years, and then He brings him back. And He says, you were out for 100 years, and nothing happened to you. In the same way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bring this back to, from nothing. Ibrahim alayhi salam's story, which is the one right after this is verse 260. Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands him, why don't you take some, a bird and kill this bird, okay, and cut it into pieces, and then put that on different mountains. Put that on different mountainsides, and then after that, stand and then call upon it. And so basically, not only have you killed this animal, but you have spread it all around. You've spread it everywhere. Stand there and then call to this animal. Call to this animal. And watch what happens. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brings all of it together. He brings it back into the bird and He gives it life, and then it comes to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And you're just wondering, in amazement, Ibrahim alayhi salam is looking at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the second to last part that we talked about. Ibrahim alayhi salam sees right in front of him, just like Ezra, Uzair, he saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's incredible power and His knowledge right there, summed up. Now this is the second to last part, just like, the second part that we talked about. And finally, the last part is just like the first part was faith and disbelief. This is faith and disbelief again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about the iman of the prophets, and He talks about the Muslims who believe in the unseen. Just like He says at the beginning, He says, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention to them again at the very end of this surah, where He says that آمَنَ الرَّسُولُ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ رَبِّهِ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Indeed, the Prophet has believed in what has been descended upon him, and the believers. وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ كُلٌّ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ. All of them have believed. All of them have brought iman on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as His books, as well as His prophets. لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِّن رُسُلِهِ. And then they say, this is what they say that we do not separate between any of the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of them we hold in extremely high esteem. All of them, we don't look down on any of them. Which is unfortunately the problem with some of these theologies, including, Judaism, is that they actually, say some blasphemous things about significant prophets. For example, Sulaiman alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, who is the patriarch of their faith. They actually say some pretty terrible things about him. And Islam does, absolutely absolve them, or all of the prophets, of any of these untrue and false claims. We say no, they were divinely protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of His prophets. لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله. وَقَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. And they say that we have heard and we have obeyed. We have heard and obeyed. Just like we began Surah Al-Baqarah, we say that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, guess what? There are going to be things in this book you don't understand. But that does not mean there is doubt in it. Just because you don't understand the math doesn't mean that the math is wrong. So just because you don't understand the book doesn't mean that it's wrong. So what do the true believers say? What do the true believers say? قَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. We have heard it and we have obeyed it. Because we know that, hey, there is plenty of things that I don't get, but I just go with it. Because I know that there must be a wisdom behind it. I believe in the rest of it, and I understand the rest of it. There are parts that I don't understand, but I take it. غُفْرَانَكَ رَبَّنَا وَإِلَيْكَ الْمَصِيرُ. Oh Allah, we seek your forgiveness. We seek your forgiveness, and to you is the return. And then the end of this surah, this is another beautiful thing, is that the connection, one of the huge connections with this surah and Surah Al-Fatiha is that this surah also ends with a dua just like Surah Al-Fatiha. We'll talk about that in just one second. But I just want to make sure that you guys understood the structure of this surah, which is in 9 parts. We mentioned that it's in 9 parts. So let's summarize it one more time. The first part was faith and unbelief. Okay, faith and disbelief. Okay, kufr, iman and kufr. The last part was again iman and kufr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about those people who have true iman. Okay, the people who have true iman. And then at the end, by the way, they also say that, أَنْتَ مَوْلَانَا فَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. You are our caretaker, so help us against those who have disbelief. So again, mention of belief and disbelief, which is the last part, and as well as the first part. The second part is Allah's creation and His knowledge, which was when we talked about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His creation of Adam alayhi salam and the angels asking Him the wisdom behind that. As well as the second to last part, which was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us the story of Uzair, Ezra, and the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Them seeing the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, them seeing that, I don't know how God does this. I want to see God's knowledge, I want to see His power in action, which is exactly what happens. So that's the second part and the second to last part. The third part is when the law was given to, the sharia that was given to the Bani Israel. Musa alayhi salam gives the law to the Jewish tribe during his time specifically. And then the third to last part was all of the commandments that are related to us. The commandments that are related to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about fasting, right? Shahru Ramadan is in this surah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about fasting, right? It says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam. That, oh, you who have believed, fasting has been prescribed upon you. So that third to last part is about our sharia, our rulings. Third part and the third to last part is about sharia. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Ibrahim alayhi salam. Remember Ibrahim alayhi salam and his son Ismail as they're building the Kaaba and they're making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. So the test that Ibrahim alayhi salam was given, and then him passing the test and him building the Kaaba and him making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about the Muslims who will soon they will come to Makkah, and then soon they will have a prophet from amongst them. So he is asking Allah to send a prophet who was essentially Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who would come from the progeny of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So that is that fourth part. The fourth to last part is the Muslims. We see that the Muslims are enjoying the fruits of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the acceptance of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam. They see that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has now come into Makkah itself as the acceptance of the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a prophet from amongst them, from amongst specifically the people of Makkah. And then the pivot, which was the fifth part, okay, where we see that this is the folding point of the surah. The folding point of the surah is the fifth part, where the Kaaba is made as the new Qibla. The new Qibla, which is the fifth part, and it happens right at the beginning of the second juz. Right at the beginning of the second juz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells the believers that, now you are turned this way, okay, so we know that you should turn this way now. And He calls them ummatan wasata, He calls them the middle nation, them as in us, okay, the Muslims, He calls us the middle nation. So the middle verse of the surah is the word where is where the phrase the middle nation comes from, is specifically placed in that verse. Now let's look at I know we've mentioned some specific ayahs and specific stories already, but let's look at some very significant points in this surah. And there are so many, honestly. Like the entire, think about, Shahru Ramadan is in this story, in this surah. So I'm definitely not going to do it justice by going into everything. However, I'll just make mention of a few ayahs, of a few specific ayahs, which if I didn't, I know that I would get a lot of heat for. So firstly, of course, let's talk about the most important verse. The most important verse, which is, of course, Ayatul Kursi. So this is, and there are many narrations that affirm the fact that this surah itself, this verse itself is the most sacred verse. It is the most special verse. This is known as the throne verse. Ayatul Kursi. Ayatul Kursi. Okay? The verse of the throne, the Kursi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is verse 255. 255. Okay, so let's turn there. Now, I hope you guys are in you still have that same, thinking about how this surah was in a ring structure, okay? How it was like, you're able to fold it. Because the same thing happens in Ayatul Kursi. So the ring structure of Surah Al-Baqarah is on a macro scale. So let's look at it on a micro scale, which would be Ayatul Kursi, just the one verse itself. This is a verse, by the way, that everyone should memorize. Like, this should be, I honestly think, the very first thing that all of our children should be made to memorize, is this verse itself. There's so many verses, there's so many hadith of the Prophet ﷺ which talk about its benefits, its merits, how it provides protection from so many evils, so many physical harms, spiritual maladies, so many unseen harms. Nabi ﷺ himself used to do dawam upon this single verse. He ﷺ used to read it constantly, all the time. There's a hadith that the person who reads this verse after every fard prayer, there's nothing stopping that person from going into Jannah. Nothing is in between that person and Jannah, just because they read this verse so consistently. And this verse itself is the greatest praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The greatest praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in this verse. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's own words to describe His own majesty. Just one verse that does it. So let's look at it. He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. I'm going to do this verse, in an easier way. I'm not going to go chronologically. I'm going to go in reverse order so we can try to understand it. The very first part of this verse is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about Himself. This is Allah la ilaha illa huwa. Allah here, the word lafzul jalala here, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's majesty, the name of His majesty is the mubtada. It is the beginning of the verse. Okay? So Allahu la ilaha illa huwa. La ilaha illa huwa. So He is the Lord, none save Him. He is the Lord, there is no Lord save Him. Okay? Al-Hayy al-Qayyum. Al-Hayy al-Qayyum. He is the one who is all living, okay, as in always living. Al-Qayyum is the all-sustaining, always sustaining. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always the one who is keeping things in order and going at all times. The last part of this verse, go to the very last part of the verse where He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. He is the most high, the most magnificent, the most powerful. Okay, so the very first part of the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings two of His names. He brings two of His characteristics. Number one, Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum. So that's in the very first part of Ayatul Kursi. The very last part of Ayatul Kursi, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says He is Al-Ali and Al-Azim. He is the most high and the most mighty. So two names of Allah up here, two names of Allah down here. Okay, so that's one and one. So let's look at number two. Okay, part number two of this verse. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. Sleep or drowsiness does not overtake Allah, nor does sleep overtake Him. Drowsiness does not overtake Him, nor does sleep. So that's the second part. Let's look at the second to last part. Okay, so again, look at the back. Look at the bottom of the surah ayah. Where He says, وَلَا يَؤُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. And it's their maintenance, which is referring to the heavens and the earth, their maintenance does not tire Him. So the second to last part talks about Allah not being tired, just like the second part talks about Allah not being overtaken by sleep or tiredness. Let's look at the third part. He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. For Him is what is in the heavens and what is on the earth. What is the third to last part? Let's go before وَلَا يَؤُودُ, go before that, where He says, وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. His throne, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's throne, has encompassed the heavens and the earth. So just like in the third part we talked about Allah having control over the heavens and the earth, the third to last part talks about how He has encompassed, Allah's kursi itself has encompassed the heavens and the earth. The fourth part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? He says, مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. Who can intercede in Allah's presence except if He gives Him permission? Unless Allah gives permission to somebody, they cannot give intercession. You can't come in front of Allah like, oh Allah, don't worry, He's with me, He's with me. You can't do that. Not unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the authority to do so. And He will, inshaAllah, on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give certain groups of people the ability to intercede on behalf of others. This includes, of course, the prophets. This includes those who are huffaz of Quran. Huffaz of Quran, the people who have memorized the Quran, they will be given the opportunity to intercede on behalf of others. Ulama, scholars, the martyrs, people who have passed away for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are other categories. I know Sheikh Dr. Yasir Qadhi, he has a whole lecture on the people who are given intercession on the Day of Judgment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give certain people on the Day of Judgment, but not everybody. So the people that he gives idhn, he gives permission. Okay, so this is that. This is the fourth part, right? He says, "Man ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه." The fourth to last part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. They as in the ins and the jinn, the humans and the jinn, they do not have any knowledge from the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except that amount that Allah gives them the ability to have knowledge of. You and I don't know anything except that which Allah gives us the ability and the permission to have knowledge of. Okay? So there is, again, the permission of Allah here and the permission of Allah right here. So we just gave it here and we just gave it here again. The fourth part and the fourth to last part. And the pivot point, which is that fifth part. The fifth part. So Ayatul Kursi is in 9 parts. Surah Al-Baqarah is in 9 parts. Okay? The fifth part, which is the middle, the pivot point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُم. Allah knows what is in front of them. Allah knows what is behind them. Basically, Allah knows what is all around us. So when he specifically uses the words what is in front, as in what is coming at the beginning, what is coming at the next part of the verse, and what already came in the back, what already came in the parts of the verse that you already finished. So this is that pivot point, okay, where he knows what's in front and where he knows what's in the back. Just like when we talked about the qibla being from this direction, now you turn towards this direction. So we notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has made the macro scale of the surah, Surah Al-Baqarah, where this is, in itself, it's a circular formation. In the same way, Ayatul Kursi itself is circular in its construction. I cannot go into all of the depths of this verse, of course. So I just wanted to talk about how beautiful it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just constructed it in such an incredible way, that it's like a mirror of itself. It's a mirror of itself. Next, let's look at the verse that follows right after Ayatul Kursi. So this ayah itself, people they make this silly claim that Islam was spread by the sword. Okay, that is a very derogatory statement. The literal meaning of that phrase, spread by the sword. Talk about any religion is when you hold a weapon, a sword to somebody and you demand that you have to do as I say. Maybe you have to convert to my religion, or you have to go do this or don't do this, whatever it might be. This is completely impermissible, obviously, and the Islam of such a person does not even count. So it doesn't make sense, right? Scholars have almost an agreement on this, that the Islam of a person who is forced to do it, that's not true Islam. The person does not have real Islam in them. Just like the opposite also rings true. If somebody holds a weapon to you, somebody holds a gun, somebody holds a knife or a sword, and they demand that you say that, I am not a Muslim anymore, and you say it, but inside your heart you're still a Muslim, yeah, then the words that you say, they don't ring true at all. Okay? Then it does not mean that you're a disbeliever, because you have been forced to say something against your will. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala summarizes this in a beautiful way, in a very simple way as well. La ikraha fi din. La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. Okay? As into religion. You cannot force a person to become a Muslim. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah talks about this. La tukrihu ahadan ala ad-dukhuli fi din al-Islam. فَإِنَّهُ بَيِّنٌ وَاضِحٌ جَلِيٌ دَلَائِلُهُ وَبَرَاهِنُهُ. He says that all of you, none of you should force somebody to become a believer. Because, the religion itself is so clear, so evident. All of its proofs, all of its dalail, all of its evidences, all of these things are completely obvious and clear. There's no doubt about them whatsoever. لا يحتاج إلى أن يكره أحد على الدخول فيه. We don't even need to force someone to become a believer. It's clear. It's right in front of you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say next? قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. Truth, okay, goodness and virtue has made itself distinctly clear and stark in contrast to disbelief and confusion. From a person becoming deluded or lost. So the right path has been made very, very, very clear. You don't need to force somebody because the person is already able to understand that themselves. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically tells us that there is no such thing as forcing somebody. It's completely not permissible to force someone that you have to be a believer. You have to be a believer. However, there is some scope for, making your children pray and things like that. That's different. Okay? The kid's already a Muslim. You better tell him that, hey, it's time to pray, get up. So don't let your children use that against you, because this applies to forcing someone to enter into religion. But if someone's already a Muslim, you and I are definitely responsible for telling people what is okay for them to do and what is not okay for them to do. It is actually our responsibility for telling them what is correct and what is impermissible. Next, I wanted to go over another, I don't want to say controversial, but something that people they try to misuse. And this is an ayah of abrogation. The ayah of abrogation is known as ayatun nasakh. So let's go to verse 106. I know we're kind of going backwards, but verse 106, where he subhanahu wa ta'ala, he specifically says, ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسيها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a very, very, very like general, translation, is referring to those verses, those commands specifically, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He abrogates them, or He makes Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, forget them, then He will bring that which is either better than that, or He will bring something similar to it. And don't you know that Allah is over all things capable? Basically, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's prerogative to do as He so wishes. Now, there are long topics and discussions and debates about, the verses that have arguably been abrogated or not been abrogated. And people, they try to, like I said, misconstrue the arguments and these verses. So we shouldn't get too involved in them. We should leave it up to our scholars to do that. However, what is one of the, the primary wisdoms behind nasakh, abrogation? Okay, what does that mean anyways? What is abrogation? Basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might give a command. He will say, do this. And then 2 years later, another command might say, okay, don't do that anymore. Or, you're given permission to do this, and now you're no longer given permission to do this. So why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala change the command for the Muslims who are living, and 10 years later He might give a different command? Aisha radiallahu anha has asked about this, and she gives a very, very, very beautiful answer. She says, إِنَّمَا نَزَلَ أَوَّلُ مَا نَزَلَ مِنْهُ سُورَةٌ مِنَ الْمُفَصَّلِ. She says that, indeed the very first things that began to be revealed from the Prophet ﷺ, or upon the Prophet ﷺ, was these short surahs. Okay, the short surahs. Basically the surahs that you see at the end of the Quran, the 29th and the 30th ajza, those separas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, many of those surahs to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the very beginning of his prophethood. فيها ذكر الجنة والنار حتى إذا ثاب الناس إلى الإسلام. She says that, you will find within these surahs, the smaller, shorter ones, you will see that there is mention of Jannah and you will see mention of hellfire. Okay, paradise and hellfire. Why? Because we are trying to build the people's iman. We're trying to build those people's iman because they have been living their lives completely oblivious to an afterlife. They don't care about the consequences of their actions. So these verses came to describe that, hey, not only is there Jannah, but here's what is in Jannah. Not only is there a hellfire, but here's what is in hellfire. So that's what these surahs came for. And then she says that until people became used to it, until they began to accept the reality that, hey, there is an all-powerful creator and He has something in store for people. So then after they became comfortable with this notion, she says that حَتَّى إِذَا ثَابَ النَّاسُ إِلَى الْإِسْلَامِ نَزَلَ الْحَلَالُ وَالْحَرَامُ. And then when people became used to Islam, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began to give commandments of what is permissible and what is no longer permissible. Halal and haram. وَلَوْ نَزَلَ أَوَّلُ شَيْءٍ لَا تَشْرَبُ الْخَمْرِ لَقَالُوا لَا نَدَعُ الْخَمْرَ أَبَدًا. She says that if, and she knows her people better than anyone, she says that if the very first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed upon them was, do not drink alcohol, لَا تَشْرَبُ الْخَمْرِ, they would have said, as in the people who had, accepted Islam, and we're talking about people in Mecca, they would have probably said, she says those people would have probably said, we're never going to leave alcohol. We're never going to leave alcohol. So, and again, she knows her people better than anyone. So she says it took time to build the iman of those people. And the commandment for leaving alcohol came in Medina. It came much later. And wine and drinking wine and selling and being in the business of wine was a huge thing in Mecca. Is a huge thing in Mecca and is a huge thing in Hijaz itself, right? In the Arabian Peninsula. But after the Muslims had finally come to Medina and they had become used to taking any and all commands from the Prophet ﷺ, then when the command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came, okay, that guess what? First they were told, okay, you should not, drink alcohol, you should not pray when you're drunk. Okay, don't come with alcohol to the masjid. Okay, don't come to the masjid when you're drunk. Do it in your own homes. And then finally it was told, don't drink alcohol anymore, don't engage in its business, don't do anything related to alcohol. At that moment, the Muslims and those who still had alcohol in their homes, they destroyed all of their, their stock of wine that they had, so much so that the streets of Medina began to flow with wine. Why were they so adamant on this? Because they were so strong. Their iman had become so strong over time. This is an example for us. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has introduced this concept and this idea of abrogation for us to take an example. If you know somebody, and I'm sure you do, in your life who doesn't even pray once, The person doesn't pray once a day. You cannot go up to them and just demand that they start praying tahajjud tomorrow. I mean, he doesn't even pray once. She doesn't, come to the masjid once a year. She comes to the masjid maybe for Eid. That's it. How can you and I force people, who don't even practice whatsoever, to become angels by tomorrow? We cannot do that, and nor should we do so. We should take the prophetic advice, and we should take the same, recipe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us in the Quran by way of revelation, which was talk to people about Jannah, talk to people about Jahannam, talk to people about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talk to them about the shortness of this life, talk to them about the length of the hereafter, until the people become used to it, until that reality settles in their heart, that hey, you know what, life is not all about, just enjoying myself for the few years that I have here. Maybe there is something beyond. And then when they begin to realize this, then they will start to invest their time and their efforts and their energy into actually improving themselves, into actually worshipping, into actually bringing all the commandments of Islam into their lives. But the reason why we are so weak is because our iman is so weak. And our iman is specifically in Jannah, in Jahannam, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's about building these foundations and these fundamentals first, and then all of those things will become so easy. It'll become a piece of cake to wake up for tahajjud. It'll become a piece of cake to give charity. It'll become a piece of cake to do all of these things, because our iman will be built up over time. Another verse that I really wanted to speak about, which is again, misused unfortunately by people, and this was, I was recently asked about this by one of my students. He said, my classmate, he's a regular teenager. He says, one of my classmates came up to me, one of my friends came up to me, and he says, in the Quran it says that you guys can, kill the disbelievers. I found verses that say you can kill the disbelievers. And my friend's like, I didn't know what to say to him. I got scared. I said, oh, I don't know. Does it really say that? So, I laughed because I like to mess with him. But this is, our response is always the same. Unfortunately, we don't really give a very, nuanced response. When people say that, oh, look, your Quran says you can kill the believer or the disbelievers. You can, chop our heads off and stuff. And we tell them, oh, well, you have to understand the context. There's a context behind it. Understand the context. And what will they say? Imagine one of them actually calls us out on it and says, okay, yeah, explain to me the context. What are going to be like? Actually, you know what? I need some time to research it. Let me look it up on Google very quickly. No, we should know the context behind some of these verses. Okay, so we don't just give the same, blanket response that, oh yeah, you have to know the context behind it, and we don't even know what the context really is. Okay, we don't really know what the context is. The simplest way of understanding context is this. Know the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Know the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's it. Study the seerah of the Nabi ﷺ and just see the condition of Muslims as it began to change. As they went from being a downtrodden, oppressed people, okay, who were literally being killed and threatened for their religion, okay, just because they didn't want to worship idols, to Muslims becoming the dominant force in their time in a short span of 20 years. Which is insane, by the way. Any political scientist will tell you that that's unheard of. So when we understand this 23-year, chain of events that transpired, then it will become easier for us to understand why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them at many times, don't hurt, don't fight back, don't say anything, don't do anything. There are Sahaba, and I believe it's Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu anhu. He came to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he complained to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, look at what we're going through. We're not allowed to. This was in Mecca. We're not allowed to, do anything to them. We're not allowed to step up and say something. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that, and he gave them examples, and he said that, there are people who came before you, prophets who came before you. They would be sawed in half. They would be sawed in half. That's how they would be killed and tortured by their people. And he says, just wait. Have some patience. Don't worry. And eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave the Muslims, after persecution, years of persecution and oppression, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them finally leeway to fight back, fight against their oppressors and actually stand up, against the people who have been, hurting them and who had killed their family and their friends decades and years ago. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran, this is not something that the Muslims were eager to do. Okay, this is another thing. Don't think that the believers, especially those in Medina, were eager and they're bloodthirsty. Let's go out there and kill the people. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Fighting has been prescribed upon you even though you might dislike it. So they, the believers were not very enthusiastic. This was at the very early stage when they had just moved to Medina, and Muslims were very weak in number. They were weak in number, and the disbelievers are over there in Mecca, and they're like a powerful force. You remember Badr, okay, what happened in Badr, and we'll talk about this inshallah when we talk about Surah Ali Imran, the event of Badr, where the disbelievers come with 1,000 people and the Muslims are going with 300 who are holding sticks in their hands. Some of them were holding sticks, so the believers were not very enthusiastic because they're thinking like, how are we going to go and fight these people? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like, okay, now the command has been given that you have to go and fight. And I think the most beautiful way of explaining this verse is done by Maulana Abdul Majid Daryabadi. He talks about this, he says, persecuted, harassed, afflicted, poverty-ridden, exiled, and small in number as the Muslims were at the time of the enactment of warfare, it was but natural that they were none too fond of crossing swords with the mighty forces that had conspired for their extirpation. Nothing short of express and emphatic divine command could urge them onto the field of battle in order to defend their rights. And yet the Islamic jihads are declared to be designed by the Prophet to satisfy his discontented adherents by an ascension of plunder, which is absurd. And to say that and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Muslims, they were after plunder and they just wanted the wealth and the money behind it. Absolutely, that was not the case. It was not the case. The Muslims were actually trying to, stand up to a force that had been attacking them and persecuting them. Remember, the Muslims ran away from Mecca. They ran away from those people. And not only, but the Meccans were not happy that the Muslims ran away. They didn't just say, okay, you know what, fine, let them live in Medina. No, they said that, you know what, let's end these people right now. Let's go. And that's what they did. They got their armies ready and they made a move towards Medina. And so the Muslims, they had no choice but to actually go and defend and fight against them. And eventually that is what happened with the Muslims, inshallah, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They actually overcame their oppressors over a series of battles, which we'll talk about, inshallah, in due time. And now we will end with the very final verse that was revealed in all of Revelation. Okay, according to many scholars, all of Revelation, not the very final verse of this surah. However, it is towards the end of this surah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, and this is verse 281. 281. Okay, so if you could just turn to that, I can also just turn to that. He subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the believers, and this is a command. Okay, this is a command. This is fi'l amr here. وَاتَّقُوا. So have taqwa of. Be cognizant of. People are, again, we're not going to use the word fear. Okay, we're not going to use the word fear. Be cognizant and be aware of what? Of a day. يَوْمًا. Be aware of a day. تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. The day where you will all of you, will be returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single one of you will be returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only that, that's not it. It's not just to be aware of the fact that you will die. However, ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And then every single soul will be given that which it has earned. Basically, you will be given, a recompense for exactly what you did in life. Whether you did good or you did evil or you mixed up the both of them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you will be, no injustice will be done to you. Everything that will be done will be given in just order. A complete, perfect order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the very final verse that was revealed upon our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is a warning not only to, this was, this sealed revelation upon the seal of all the prophets. So this is the seal of revelation upon the seal of the prophets sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is an ayah that implores us, you and I, to be conscious of the day of judgment, of the day that we will be returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the day of judgment is not just that day that is so far away. Rather, it is the day that we pass away. Okay? The person, مَنْ مَاتَ قَدْ قَامَتْ قِيَامَتُهُ. The person, when he dies, then his qiyamah has already started. That's it, because your book of deeds is shut now. Okay, you're done. You've done what you've done. So now you're in the grave. Your qiyamah, that's the day that you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And each and every single one of us will experience that day. That is the day of our departure, yours and mine. Okay, we don't have a say in this. This is the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't know when that day might come. It might come today, tomorrow, tonight. Who knows when it will be? But eventually, every one of us will return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the person who becomes conscious of it earlier than later, that is the person who can make most of the time that they have available to them. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq, give you tawfiq, give myself as well, to live our lives according to the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to the teachings of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and recognizing that one day I will go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.